My father's voice used to be the sound of authority. It was the voice that told me to tough it out when I was a kid. But last Tuesday, that voice shattered. For the first time in my 34 years, I heard my father sob. Not just a sniffle, a gut-wrenching, desperate wail that traveled through the speaker and made my skin crawl. He didn't know it yet, but that sound was music to my ears. Because 2 years ago, I was the one crying. I was the one begging. And he? He was too busy choosing a floral arrangement for a party to notice his daughter was dying. I'm Julianne. I'm 34, a senior architectural designer, and I live in a city that's exactly 400 miles away from the people who share my DNA. I say DNA because, after what happened, family isn't a word they're allowed to own anymore. 2 years ago, my life was a blueprint for success until a doctor handed me a folder that changed everything. Stage 3. Lymphoma. I remember my hands shaking so hard the paper sounded like a deck of cards being shuffled. I did what any terrified person would do. I called home. I told my father I was sick. I told him I was scared. I told him I needed them. Do you know what he said? He didn't ask about the prognosis. He didn't ask if I had a ride to the clinic. He sighed, a long, frustrated sound, and said, "Julianne, your brother's wedding is in 3 months. Your mother is already stressed about the catering. Don't start drama right now." Drama. That was my cancer to them. An inconvenience. An unscheduled interruption to my brother Leo's perfect day. Hold on. Before we get into the real stuff, I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. Are you folding laundry? Commuting? I want to visualize who I'm talking to. For the next 6 months, I went through hell. 36 hospital visits. Rounds of chemotherapy that made me feel like my veins were filled with battery acid. I lost my hair. I lost 20 pounds. And I lost my faith in the people who raised me. Not once did a single member of my family visit. Not my mother, not Leo, and certainly not my father. They sent one group text, a picture of Leo's tuxedo fitting. I spent my nights in a cold apartment, shivering from the chills, staring at a phone that never rang. I survived, but the girl who went into that treatment died. The woman who came out? She was made of steel and ice, which brings us back to last Tuesday. The phone rang. It was him. "Julianne," he choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I'm at the hospital. The doctors, they say I need an emergency transplant. The donor list is too long. You're my only hope. Please, I'm your father." I looked at my reflection in the window, healthy, strong, and completely indifferent. I let the silence stretch until he started to whimper. Then, I gave him my answer. It was exactly 4 words, and those 4 words, they didn't just leave him speechless. They ended the man I used to call Dad. But before I tell you what I said, you need to understand the twisted thing my brother did the day of my surgery, the thing that made my revenge not just a choice, but a necessity. My father's begging was pathetic. It was the sound of a man who realized too late that he had burned the only bridge that could lead him to safety. But before I could even process his request for a transplant, my mind flashed back to the day that defined my hatred. The day of my brother Leo's wedding. While I was in a sterile room, my body rejecting its own cells, my family was in a ballroom. While I was losing my hair in clumps, my mother was busy choosing the perfect silk ribbon for the centerpieces. I remember the morning of my second surgery. I was terrified. I called my mom from the pre-op gurney. My voice was a whisper, cracked from dehydration. I told her, "Mom, I'm going under in 10 minutes. Can you just say you love me?" There was music in the background of her phone, classical strings and laughter. She whispered back, "Julianne, not now. The photographer is here, and Leo is nervous. You're being so selfish. Just text me when you're out, okay? Don't ruin this for him. Don't ruin this for him. My life-threatening surgery was an inconvenience to a photo op. I laid there as the anesthesia took hold, a single tear rolling into my ear, realizing that if I died that day, they wouldn't even postpone the cake cutting. I spent 2 weeks in recovery. Not one bouquet of flowers, not one get well card. But my Instagram feed? It was flooded. My brother Leo posted a photo of the entire family. My mom, my dad, his new wife, and her parents. They were all grinning, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Finally, our family is complete. Wouldn't change a thing." I was alive. But to them, I was already a ghost. I was a loose end they had snipped off because I didn't fit the perfect family aesthetic. I went through the rest of my treatment alone. I hired a nurse to help me bathe. I paid a neighbor to walk my dog. I fought the darkest battle of my life, and I won. When I finally went into remission, I didn't call them. I didn't post it on social media. I changed my number. I moved to a high-rise with a doorman who had strict instructions. No one with my last name gets past the lobby. I spent 2 years building a fortress around my heart. I became a senior architect, designing buildings that were as cold and unshakable as I had become. I was happy. I was free. Until that phone call. My father's voice on the line was weak. He told me he had a rare blood condition. He told me his kidneys were failing. He told me that Leo wasn't a match. Neither was Mom. "Julianne," he pleaded. "The doctor said since you're my daughter, the odds are high. You're my only chance. I know we were busy back then, but family is family, right?" "Busy?" I asked. My voice was like a razor. "You were busy for 6 months, Dad. You were busy while I was writing my will at 32. "Please," he sobbed. "I don't want to die." I leaned back in my designer chair, looking out at the city skyline I had conquered without them. I realized I held his life in my hands, the same hands that had shook with fear while he ignored my calls. I was about to hang up, but then I heard a second voice in the background of his hospital room. It was Leo. And what Leo said into the speaker turned my cold indifference into a burning, white-hot desire for total destruction. I thought I had reached the limit of my anger. I thought my heart was already a frozen wasteland. But then, I heard my brother Leo's voice in the background of my father's hospital room, and the sheer audacity of what he said made my blood turn to liquid nitrogen. "Julianne, stop being dramatic and just get down here," Leo barked. I could hear him pacing near my father's bed. "Dad is dying. This isn't the time for your little grudge. We need you to sign the consent forms for the testing immediately. We've already cleared a room for you at the clinic." Grudge. That was what he called it. Not abandonment. Not a betrayal of the most sacred bond a family can have. To Leo, my 6 months of chemo and their 6 months of silence was just a little grudge. "Leo," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I haven't seen you in 2 years. You didn't even call me when I was declared cancer-free. Why would I give a piece of my body to a man who wouldn't even give me a phone call?" "Because you're his daughter," he yelled. "And honestly, you owe us. Do you know how much stress you put Mom through by getting sick right before my wedding? She cried for weeks because she felt guilty she couldn't be there. You took that joy away from her." I actually laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. They had spent 2 years rewriting history. In their version of the story, I was the villain for having the audacity to develop stage 3 cancer during wedding season. I was the one who had stressed my mother out by fighting for my life. My father's weak voice came back on the line. "Julianne, please. Leo is right. We're family. Whatever happened in the past, it doesn't matter now. I'm your father. I gave you life." "You gave me life," I repeated slowly. "And then you watched me almost lose it without lifting a finger. Where was family when I was vomiting in a hospital bathroom alone, Dad? Where was family when I had to take an Uber to surgery because you were at a tuxedo fitting? We were busy, he cried out, his voice cracking. It was one weekend. One wedding. It was 36 hospital visits, I corrected him. It was 180 days of silence. It wasn't a weekend. It was a lifetime. I could hear my mother in the background now, her voice frantic. Tell her we'll pay her. Tell her we'll give her whatever she wants. Just get her here. That was the final straw. They thought my soul and my organs had a price tag. They thought they could ignore me until I was dead, then buy me back when they needed a spare part. I looked down at the scar on my chest, the one from my portacath. It was a jagged reminder of the war I fought alone, a war they weren't invited to. I'll tell you what, I said, leaning into the phone. I'm coming down there. I'm coming to the hospital. I heard a collective sigh of relief over the speaker. Leo started talking about flight times. My father started thanking God. But they didn't realize I wasn't coming to save him. I was coming to look him in the eye and show him exactly what he had discarded. I booked the flight. I packed a bag. But I didn't go alone. I brought a folder with me. A folder containing a secret about my brother's perfect life that was about to turn their desperate hope into a living nightmare. Walking into that hospital wing felt like stepping back into a grave. The smell of antiseptic, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, it all rushed back. But this time, I wasn't the one in the gown. I wasn't the one looking for a miracle. I was the miracle they didn't deserve. When I pushed open the door to room 412, the silence was deafening. My father looked like a shell of the man I remembered. He was gray, hooked up to monitors that beeped with a frantic cadence. My mother was huddled in a chair, and Leo was leaning against the window, looking bored until he saw me. Julianne, my mother gasped, standing up. She reached out to hug me, but I stepped back, placing my designer handbag between us like a shield. Don't, I said. My voice was like dry ice. We aren't that kind of family. Leo rolled his eyes. Finally, the martyr arrives. Did you bring the medical records? The surgeon is waiting for your blood type verification. I didn't look at Leo. I looked straight at my father. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of hope and terror. Julianne, thank you for coming. I knew you'd realize. Family is everything. Is it, Dad? I asked. I pulled a manila folder from my bag. Because for 6 months, I was nothing to you. I was a stressor. I was drama. I was an inconvenience to Leo's big day. Get over it, Leo snapped. The wedding was 2 years ago. Dad is dying now. Funny you should mention the wedding, Leo, I said, opening the folder. I pulled out a stack of financial statements and legal documents I'd acquired through my connections in the architectural firm. Specifically, the firm that handled the audit for Leo's struggling business. What is that? My mother asked, her voice trembling. It's the reason Leo is so desperate for Dad to live, I said, tossing the papers onto my father's lap. Leo didn't just have a perfect wedding. He took a private loan from Dad's retirement fund to pay for that ballroom, the champagne, and the 5-star catering. And according to these documents, he hasn't paid back a cent. If Dad dies now, the estate goes into probate, the loan is called in, and Leo loses his house. The room went white cold. My mother looked at Leo, whose face had turned a sickly shade of purple. My father looked down at the papers, his shaking hands fumbling with the numbers. You didn't call me because you cared about Dad, I said, looking at my brother. You called me because I'm the only one who can save your lifestyle. You're not grieving. You're middle managing a crisis. My father looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Julianne, please, regardless of Leo, I'm your father. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'll make it up to you. Just, please give me the transplant. I looked at the monitors. I looked at the man who had ignored my stage 3 diagnosis to pick out a tuxedo. I felt the weight of every lonely night in that hospital bed 2 years ago. "I'm not here to sign the papers, Dad," I whispered. The surgeon walked in at that exact moment, a clipboard in hand. "Ms. Julianne, we have the compatibility results from your previous records. Are you ready to proceed?" The whole room held its breath. My father reached out his hand, his fingers trembling, waiting for me to take it. I looked at the surgeon, then back at the family who had abandoned me when I was dying. The surgeon stood there, pen poised over the clipboard, waiting for the word that would save my father's life. My mother was gripping the bed rail, and Leo was staring at me with a look of frantic entitlement. They all thought the good daughter had finally shown up. They were wrong. I looked at the surgeon, a kind-looking man who had no idea he was standing in the middle of a crime scene, the scene where a family had murdered their daughter's trust. "Doctor," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I'm not here to provide a transplant. I'm here to provide a reality check." My mother shrieked, "Julianne, what are you saying? He's your father. He's dying." "He was dying 2 years ago, Mom," I said, turning to her. "Or at least I was. And when I was, you told me not to ruin the mood. You told me my cancer was a distraction. Well, today, I'm finally taking your advice. I'm not going to let this distraction ruin my life anymore." My father's hand dropped from the bed. The hope in his eyes vanished, replaced by a hollow, terrifying realization. "Julianne, please. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. I'll give you the house. I'll disown Leo. Just don't let me die." "You already let me die, Dad," I whispered, leaning in close so only he could hear the ice in my words. "The girl who loved you, the girl who would have given you both her kidneys without a second thought. She died in a hospital room while you were dancing at a wedding. You're asking a stranger for a miracle." Leo lunged toward me, his face twisted in rage. "You selfish You're going to let him die over a grudge? You're a monster." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just looked at the brother who had stolen my parents' attention while I was fighting for my breath. "I'm not a monster, Leo. I'm just an architect. And I've realized this family's foundation is too rotten to save. It's time to let the whole building fall." I turned back to my father. He was sobbing now, a pathetic, wet sound that echoed off the sterile walls. He looked at me one last time, his lips trembling, silently begging for the mercy he never gave me. I adjusted my coat, picked up my bag, and looked him right in the eye. I gave him the answer I had prepared the moment he called me crying. "I don't know you." The heart monitor beeps rhythmically in the background as Julianne turns her back and walks toward the door. I didn't look back. Not when my mother started screaming my name. Not when Leo cursed me. I walked out of that hospital, through the sliding glass doors, and into the fresh, cold air of a world where I owed no one anything. I survived cancer alone. I could survive the guilt they tried to put on me, because revenge isn't always about fire and fury. Sometimes revenge is simply choosing yourself when everyone else chose to leave you behind. If this story hit home for you, or if you've ever had to stand up to people who only love you when they need something, hit that like button. And finally, make sure to subscribe to Silent Revenge Lab.